It isn't easy to turn classic monster characters into figures of fun and gut-busting comedies. Many have tried to go all funny on something that had been serious. Sam Raimi hit a home run with Evil Dead 2, yes, and we covered that one a few years ago. But this is the second consecutive week we've covered a movie that indeed masterfully blends horror and comedy. It was Shaun of the Dead 7 days ago. Shaun! Pickle! Now we've got... Well, you downloaded this thing. You know it's Young Frankenstein. So to celebrate talented people like Melvin Kaminsky and Jerome Silberman, I recommend you toast them. I won't judge you for whatever beverage you put in your receptacle in order to take part in that toasting of Mel and Jean, but I do have a suggestion. Buy a hot drink or a cold brew from our sponsor, Sparkplug Coffee. If you appreciate getting the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans that can be found in Canada, then you'll appreciate what Sparkplug puts in the bag. They deliver to folks who live in the US, and naturally Canada, and our shipments will hit your porch within a week. Canadians even get to enjoy free shipping. Peruse their menu to find out what you like best amongst their many blends and roasts. The seasons change 4 times a year, or so I've been told. 1, 2, 3, that's 4, right. So maybe try one of the rotating seasonal blends. And if you're a half-calf or decaf type of singing and dancing, reanimated corpse, then ritz it up that way. Or do a jig while you set up a membership in Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. Set that thing up. That gets you perks and plenty of deals, plus you'll save money on every order. You can even customize to get your beans when it suits your schedule. This is not remotely a constrictive Coffee of the Month Club, Gary Cooper. Super duper. The website is sparkplug.coffee. Try all that and add a /HYES to save 20% off your next order. Our HYES promo code is the one-time key to keeping some coins in your change purse. Well, we've talked about Sparkplug for a few minutes here. Now it's time to talk about laughing. Talk about it, do it, all that. And action. Have you ever seen Young Frankenstein? Well, hi, and happy Canadian Thanksgiving to those who celebrate the holiday today, not at the end of November like the Americans do, and happy Columbus Day to our American listeners. And thanks to you Ritz Put-Oners for letting your ears lap up the 3rd episode here in Scary Movie Month, but it's also the 616th episode you will find on this channel we call Have You Ever Seen? We post spoiler-laden reviews of classic motion pictures every Monday, and every other Friday, too. In fact, a Friday show is coming up in just 4 days. I work alone on Fridays, but I'm working alone today, too. Bev just recently started taking 1 Monday off every month, and this is her week off in October. So her husband, Ryan Ellis here, a.k.a. me, will monologue at you about this brilliant horror comedy. Bev isn't really a fan of this movie in the first place, so that's partly why I chose to cover this on her week off. As has become my routine in my solo shows the last couple of months, I'll be giving you 3 trivia questions in the last few minutes of this extravaganza. These are from the trivia games I created for our friends when I started hosting game night during the pandemic. The world said, no more hanging around in pubs, dummies. So we improvised, and I just kept making up games for the gang. But we'll get to that later. When I review movies on my own, I go through the story scene by scene, I go off on a few tangents, I make wisecracks at the movie's expense, because who doesn't like indulging in tomfoolery at least once in a while? And I often do impressions of famous people. Most people know the Frankenstein story, and this is a sly satire of that. American doctor Gene Wilder plays Dr. Frederick Frankenstein, who goes home to Transylvania when his great-grandfather dies. He's reluctant to get into the family business, but does read up on how his grandfather did what he did, which was reanimate dead flesh. He's surrounded by nitwits and other weird people like Marty Feldman as not Igor, but Igor. Teri Garr as Fred's horny assistant Inga, and Madeleine Kahn as Frank's quirky ladylove Elizabeth. Frederick and friends stitch Peter Boyle together and bring the galoot back from the dead, and hilarity, she ensues. So let's analyze the bona fides of Young Frankenstein. It was released to theaters by 20th Century Fox in mid-December 1974. So this film is just 2 months away from birthday number 50. By the way, for those who might be newish to this podcast, the reason I say Fox like that is because our dog Fox, our Pomeranian, our long-dead dog now, we've been mocking by saying Fox, because he would get excited about himself. He really cared more about his own life than anyone else's. Anyway, this movie packed him in. In fact, this was such a monster hit, that it's 139th on Box Office Mojo's list of top 200 hits when adjusted for inflation. Wow. Brooks's Blazing Saddles is 56 in that list. And guess when that was released? The same year, only it came out in February. So 74. My birthday was that year. Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein. A lot of other great things in 74. Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder could have said they were the kings of the world that year, long before James Cameron could. I should tell you that I only learned recently that Box Office Mojo stopped adding to their adjusted for inflation list 4 years ago. Why? Did COVID break their calculators? Well, anyway, the Mojo doesn't keep updating, so even if Young Frankenstein would be a lot further down the list than 139th now, it did clearly make a killing. On Rotten Tomatoes, you're looking at pure gold. The critics' reviews are 95% positive, with an average of 8.6 out of 10. Of their 73 write-ups, 69 are fresh, and 92% of audiences say, for the love of Mel, see this movie. And those are the best reviews of Mel Brooks' directing career, although the producers and Blazing Saddles aren't that far behind. My boys Siskel and Ebert both praised Young Frankenstein back then, although it didn't make either of their top 10 lists that year, as it did mine. I had it fourth, behind Chinatown, The Godfather Part 2, and The Conversation. That last one's going to come up again in this podcast. The National Film Preservation Board entered this film into the registry in 2003, along with titles like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which is also going to come up again later in this episode, and they also inducted Patton and White Heat. Reviews of those 3 titles can indeed be found on this channel, so scroll way back in our archives to find out what we had to say about them. Oh, and for the record, Blazing Saddles went into the National Film Registry in 2006, National Film Registry, but the producers beat both of them to the movie punch because it started being preserved in 1996. So the oldest movie went in first, then these two were in, 3 years apart? Anyway, all 3 are in there. Little Boy Frank was nominated for 2 Oscars. Wilder and Brooks' adapted screenplay was up for a trophy. And the Portman and Cantamessa sound, those 2 guys, they were honored with a nomination too. While the script is comic genius, it's hard to argue with the Academy going with Coppola and Puzo's Godfather Part 2 script as the winner of the adapted screenplay Oscar. This movie is on many greatest comedies of all time lists, but you know that I like to focus on the American Film Institute, and this was on 2 of their lists. Puttin On The Ritz was 89th on the top 100 songs. Now that tune was also in a Fred Astaire Bing Crosby film called Blue Skies, so the AFI included that during the same segment that honored Young Frankenstein on the top 100 songs during the show. And Frankie Boy was, maybe appropriately considering we hear the clock chime 13 times during the opening credits, 13th on AFI's top 100 laughs. I say this belongs in the top 10, although Wilder and Brooks did make the top 10 with Blazing Saddles. That was 6th, and the producers was 11th. I say that's upside down, though. This is funnier than those other 2. Brooks doesn't agree. He may have acknowledged that this is the best flick he ever directed, but he thought the other 2 were funnier. I think he's wrong, although I can tell you now that I didn't laugh at this quite as often as I have in the past. Maybe that was because when I watch films for these solo reviews, I spend so much time taking notes that I do miss jokes in the comedies. I'm a pretty good multitasker, but I only have 1 set of eyes, and they're not even very good eyes. They're not Marty Feldman's eyes, but, well, he probably has better vision than I do. Look at the size of those things. Or did, he's long dead. The Frankster was also nominated by the AFI for the top 25 music scores, plus Marty Feldman's What Hump was nominated for the top 100 quotes, too. Really? That line? It's a fun gag, but who quotes that line and how consequential is it to the movie as a whole? Well, anyway, the last AFI thing is that this was a candidate for the 2007 Top 100 list. None of Mel Brooks' films were honored in 1998 or 2007 for those AFI lists, even though he's in the first special literally saying at one point, AFI, where are your comedies? His wife, Anne Bancroft, was in The Graduate, though, and the AFI loves that movie. In fact, it was in the top 10 on that first list, and I think the top 20 or so on the second one, and it made other lists, too, including the comedies. And, of course, he's all over the top 100 laughs himself, so they made it up to him in some ways. Okay, so let's inch our way through the story now. The film starts with a serious musical introduction. We get all the credits as we slowly zoom in on Castle Frankenstein. This could even be a serious chapter in the Franken story at this point, until we hear the clock bong 13 times. Thank you, Internet. I never noticed that until I read that many years ago, but it does bong 13 times. But then the first visual gag is when Baron von Frankenstein's very dead corpse won't let go of a little case in his hands until it's forcibly yanked away. The guy tries, 3 times? Finally gets away from the skeleton. I guess it's a safety deposit box or something, and the old dude is a full-on skeleton already. Well, he has hair, otherwise he's a skeleton. They either took their sweet time putting him in this box, or the dude decayed quickly. The box is delivered to his, I assume, last living heir, his great-grandson Frederick, who's giving a lecture over in America about the human brain and how it works. He also tells his students all about voluntary and involuntary reflexes and impulses. One demonstration has him kneeing an old man in the schnubs. He also accidentally stabs his leg with a scalpel. But don't call him Frankenstein. That's Frankenstein. He doesn't want to be remembered for the works of his kooky granddad, Victor, because he thinks the whole reanimation of dead tissue thing is claptrap. Dead is dead! Did he yell that? He yells a lot in this movie. Plus, Victor Frank tried the let's bring corpses back to life thing over in Europe enough times that it caused the family name to become Mudd. And if you want to distance yourself from something like this, then maybe don't go with your name at all. Maybe be something totally different. Also do something other than medical stuff. I think they hit the Frankenstein thing a little too hard in this movie, by the way, but Mel Brooks does love his Jewish jokes, and that pronunciation does lean towards being Jewish. But at least it does pay off quite a ways in when he finally accepts his destiny. His fiancée, that's my fiancée. Well, Elizabeth here sees him off at the train station so he can go deal with family business across the sea. Across the sea, across the sea. But don't kiss her, the makeup, or touch her head, the hair. And the dress is taffeta. That stuff wrinkles. As hilarious as Madeleine Kahn was, especially in the early 70s when she was at her best, let's not forget she was a foxy babe, too. When Frederick finally arrives in a lightning-infested and very foggy Transylvania, he meets the man who will become his loyal assistant, Marty Feldman, who questions the whole Frankenstein thing, then announces that he's not Igor, he's Igor. His grandfather worked for Frederick's Pop, so they're a natural fit. And let's not forget that his grandfather was called Fritz in the 1931 Frankenstein. Anyway, we're getting more good gags now that our man is home where he belongs. Fred brings up Igor's hump and says he's a doctor, so he could help with that. But what hump? And then he's asked to walk this way. Literally, walk this way. That hump, by the way, that sucker moves. More than once. I guess Feldman was just doing that a few times before anyone on the set even noticed. The continuity person was asleep at the switch. And how about Inga? Teri Garr waits in the back of the horse-drawn carriage Igor rolled up in, and she asks the man she met only 2 seconds ago if he would like a roll in the hay. Roll, roll in the hay. I wish I could do high voices sometimes. As Conan O'Brien once said, this is what we in show business call a no-brainer. They arrive at Castle Frank and meet up with the woman in charge, Frau Blucher, Horsewhinny. Cloris Leachman is funny in this, but did you notice that she seems to be doing a Dracula accent? Of course, we are in Transylvania. I don't think Frankenstein was actually set there, was it? No, I don't think, because, of course, Dracula and Frankenstein were different books. But they just did that here, I guess, maybe to be funny. You could argue that she knew the guy and decided the way he spoke sounded cool. Although I bet she never drinks coffee. She tries to be a good host and keeps offering Freddy various types of drinks, including Ovaltine. The mug is round. The jar is round. They should call it Roundtine. That's gold, Freddy. Gold! I watched that Seinfeld clip with Banya on YouTube again yesterday. I still find that so funny. That actor is great. It's gold, Jerry, gold. Frederick has a nightmare about his heritage and his destiny. Destiny! Destiny! Until Inga rescues him from it by jolting the man awake. They hear a violin behind the bookcase in his room and find out that taking a candle out of its candle holder will turn that bookcase very quickly and reveal a passage to a secret room. But don't put the candle back. That quote could have made the quotes list, or at least been nominated for the quotes list. I love that little bit there. Put the candle back. They end up in his grandpop's laboratory and see all kinds of decayed skeleton heads, which pays off with Igor standing in place of the freshly dead placard. Feldman doing a little song and dance number when they realize it's him always cracks me up. I always loved in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Sala says when they see the snakes in the Well of the Souls to Indy, Asps, very dangerous. You go first. But whether it was first said in this movie or maybe even by someone else in a previous movie, Raiders came out 7 years after this did, so this beat that to the punch with this funny quote because Igor says that trying to find the source of the music might be dangerous, so you go first. But the main event is in another room, the place where it all happened, and while it's a mess, there's cobwebs everywhere, Igor has faith in the potential of this room. A little paint, a few flowers, a couple of throw pillows. Always the optimist. They find the violin in a small office, sitting beside a freshly smoked cigar, and his grandfather's How I Did It book is laying there too. Frederick starts reading the instruction manual and can't put it down, even though Igor and Inga are bored out of their minds. And the man who earlier sneered at what Grampy did all those years ago claims, It could work! I guess finding out who was playing that violin is not an issue anymore. It's quite a story to read that these scientific doodads were the original props and sets from the 1931 Frankenstein. Some dude held on to all this stuff for, 43 years? People collect everything these days, but almost no one did that back then, so kudos to this guy. And for keeping it all in working order, not letting water damage or mold ruin everything. So the book leads Frederick to believe they'll need a big man to make this work, perhaps 7 feet tall, and Inga deduces that he'll have an enormous Schwanzstücke. And even though she's Fred's fiancée, it's Elizabeth who will find out about the great big Schwanzstücke towards the end of the movie. And what a break! A great big huge guy was recently hanged and then buried for crimes against Transylvanians. The doctor and the man with the hump? What hump? Dig up the coffin, which is a filthy job. Although it could be worse. It could be raining. And then it does rain. Igor is like John Locke on Lost. He can predict rain seconds before it happens. When they spill the coffin out in the street and the dead body's right hand pops up, I love this part. One of my favorite gags in the entire movie happens because a constable happens along, and Freddy Boy quickly thinks to use the body's right hand in place of his own. Seeing this again, I've seen this movie so many times, this still cracked me up so good. But the body is no good without a quality piece of cheese in the noggin, so Igor has to steal a brain. Except after he drops and smashes the glass holding the brain of the brilliant Hans Delbruck, he has to settle for one that's clearly marked, "Do not use this brain, abnormal." What were they going to use any of these brains for? Frederick is going to do a brain transplant, but did these guys plan to try something like that too? Maybe our doctor isn't the only one tampering with God in this movie then. Peter Boyle makes his first appearance at around the 40-minute mark. Well, first appearance facially at least. The team of 3 is ready to get this body reanimation show on the road. Did you notice that Igor is now calling Fred Master, which I believe is what Fritz and then Igor always called Victor in the 30s and 40s Frankenstein movies? Master. Frederick gives a big, loud, inspirational speech, loud, always loud, as he and the body are risen up to the heavens on a platform. Igor throws switches with the last one labeled The Works, love it, and Frederick demands, "Life! Give my creation life!" It's a fantastic touch when they light the inside of Boyle's head, only it's not his head. Technology even now isn't at the point of being able to put movie lights inside people's brains. Maybe next year. But no, this is just a model that only looks so convincingly like Pete's noggin. Great special effect, though, with the light inside of this plastic or glass head, whatever it was. Pretty simply done, too, when you think about it. Frederick thinks he failed because there's no heartbeat. He acts calm about the failure at first, then freaks out and starts to choke the body and pound on the chest. He's hysterical. He's not wet, and he's not in pain, but he's hysterical. I hadn't seen the movie in several years, so I forgot the scene ends here. The monster doesn't come to life just yet. He's only mostly alive. We haven't seen Kenny Mars yet, but here Inspector Kemp is, telling all kinds of village elders that they should be worried that the good doctor is following in his grandfather's footsteps. Mars puts on such a strong accent that the others can barely understand him. It was a decent gag. Plus he's got a prosthetic arm, which has to be an homage to Dr. Strangelove, and an eye patch, with a monocle over the eye patch. Goofy insanity. I don't know who thought of that, but that's great stuff. And while he's got his moments in this, I'm not in love with this character. Kenny was funnier in The Producers as the writer of the play. I said the monster didn't come to life a few minutes ago, but I guess he just needed some time to come around. Wilder gets to quote Colin Clive's famous line from the original Frankenstein, "It's alive, it's alive, it's alive!" Although the monster seems confused to be called It, or to be told he's alive. Maybe he assumed this was heaven. Could have sworn it was heaven. Freddy Franks teaches his creation to walk, but Igor picks that time to light a cigarette, which sets the creature off, and the big guy starts choking the big boss. Since Fred can't speak with all this going on, he leads his incompetent assistants in a game of charades, with Wilder having to play act, "Give him a sedative." After they calm the beast down, Frederick figures out that Igor didn't steal Hans Delbruck's brain. It was Abby someone. Abby Normal. That was a little weak, and it's a nice payoff to what we just saw with the choking of him, when Fred chokes his bug-eyed assistant for giving him a bad brain. Then he starts to play charades with Inga, asking her to get a sedative. But Inspector Kemp banging the nice knockers of the castle interrupts all this violence. The cop and the scientist play darts for some reason, during which the inspector cheats when Frederick isn't looking. The doctor also proves to be terrible at the game. And I grinned at the payoff to Wilder wildly throwing most of his darts, because when Kemp goes out to his car, we see that his driver has a dart stuck in his cap, and the car's back tire is flat because it is a dart jammed in it too. Doesn't even react. We saw, a dart in the head last week with Shaun of the Dead. Diane hits Shaun in the head with a dart when she's aiming for the bartender who's a zombie. Meantime, Frau Blucher, Horse Winnie, finally comes back on the scene, we haven't seen her in a while, and discovers the monster tied down on the lab table. She sets him free and he starts to attack everybody, but she plays her violin. We knew it was hers all along, of course, and it instantly calms down the galoot. We even discover here that Victor was Frau's boyfriend. He was my boyfriend! But the monster gets loose, which is going to lead us to the second funniest sequence in the entire movie. Well, not yet. First, our science project here stumbles across a girl out in the woods. In the original movie, the creature throws the girl into, 1 foot of water and she somehow drowns. And he did that because he had been joyfully throwing flowers into the water with her before that. Once they ran out, in she went. But in this, the girl ends up being fine. It's pretty funny, this little bit here. He should have killed her. Anyway, we need to get to the blind man's house, who's played so well by Gene Hackman. And the blind man says his name is Harold. I forgot about that. Even in the original version of this scene in Bride of Frankenstein, it's sweet and even a little humorous, but it's nothing like this. Harry thinks Monstro is a mute, an incredibly big mute, even though he is making moaning sounds. so I guess we just call the monster now nonverbal. But in a payoff to the eat, drink, and smoke scene in Bride of Frankenstein, Harold dumps soup not in the monster's bowl, but in his lap, twice. He pours him some wine, but then busts his guest's mug to pieces with a happily aggressive toast. Monster Man can't catch a break. And then came the cigars. Fire is good, fire is our friend, which Hackman says, and I think that's exactly what's in Bride of Frankenstein, exactly that dialogue. And the creature who got so mad at Igor for lighting a butt calms down long enough to let the blind man try to light his cigar, but instead he sets his thumb on fire. The big moaner is in pain, so he's out of there, smashing through the front door, even though Harold was going to make espresso. I forgot just how short this sequence is. It's only 4 or 5 minutes long. Part of what makes it so great is that you've got brawny guys like Boyle and Hackman playing such silliness. Bev always says comedy is commitment. Well, Pete and Jean committed. Also, didn't Peter Boyle originally have the role to play Popeye Doyle in The French Connection that Hackman eventually did and won an Oscar for? I think that's true. That Boyle was considered and maybe was going to have the role but didn't do it for some reason. So they're tied that way. Our trio corner the monster after he split from Casa to Harold, and they throw a net over him while Inga stabs him with one of those trusty sedatives. Even though the doctor insists that no matter what he says, don't open the door when he goes in to talk to the monster, just one aggressive move by Creature Boy has the Fredster begging to be let out. But the doc turns on the charm and compliments his handsome boy into submission. So yeah, he kills the thing with kindness and actually talks his creation down. He even has him in his arms saying, "The world should know we love him." And when Inga calls through the door to ask if Dr. Frankenstein is all right, he yells, he's always yelling, "My name is Frankenstein." So even then, still has the sh sound. Which leads us to the funniest bit in this entire movie, and one of the funniest things anyone has ever filmed. In a startling new experiment in reanimation, our gang is about to put on a show for a sold-out crowd. This is King Kong-esque, actually, right this little bit here. What's he going to do? Going to stand around for a while. What a showman. And well, he's not just standing around on this, is he? We're going to get to that. And it's apparently a one-night-only presentation, so you better enjoy it while you can, Transylvanians. For the crowd's intellectual and philosophical pleasure, we get the monster being shown to walk heel to toe. That gets a round of applause. Then walking backwards that same way gets another round. And it even gets the monster a treat, just like he's a dog or a dolphin. But then came Puttin On The Ritz. You can see Marty Feldman off to the side playing the piano, incidentally, but they never show him be part of this insanity beyond that. I guess they cut something out where he did have a bigger role in this sequence. Wilder and Boyle are both in top hats and tails, with Wilder handling the job of lead singer of Irving Berlin's classic song, while Boyle is hilariously barely able to squeak out Puttin On The Ritz. Just thinking about this makes me laugh. Bev was never that impressed with this movie when I showed it to her a few years ago, but she even recently acknowledged that this is absolutely hilarious, and it had her in pain. She said, "I'm in physical pain watching this scene and Springtime for Hitler in The Producers." She loves that too, but didn't love that movie either. I especially love when they start doing tap, and also when the monster does the, what do you call it, the flapper dance? I guess Brooks didn't even think this scene would work, and he thought it was getting too far away from what they were satirizing, but he admitted he was wrong once preview audiences lost their minds over it. And I have to ask a reasonably good question. How long did they rehearse this? I don't mean the actors, Wilder and Boyle. I mean, how long did Frederick work with the monster, with the big boy not getting it for days on end, and they're going again? It's a funny sequence. Can you imagine that being filmed? He doesn't quite have it yet. Let's do it again, master. And this is going so well, but then it all goes to hell when a stage light bursts, and that sets off the fire hater, who freaks out and dives into the crowd. If you know Batman Returns at all, in the scene where the penguin is pelted with eggs and tomatoes, then you should recognize how Tim Burton shot that to look just like this scene does. Even the close-ups are the same, and the way the angry guy dives into the crowd and knocks people over. Only the authorities capture this guy. He doesn't escape into the sewer the way Penguin does. The monster was briefly beloved for his dancing talent, but now he's chained and imprisoned. But cut him some slack. He only got mad because the show didn't go exactly the way he thought it would. Maybe someone should have put Christian Bale in chains when he was doing Terminator Salvation and lost his mind on that cinematographer. Oh, yeah, sure. Frederick might be engaged, but he finally succumbs to the obvious connection he had with Inga, and they do some bumping on that trusty table that rises up to the heavens. Only they're found by Frau Blucher, Horse Winnie, who tells them that Elizabeth is coming tonight. The socialite shows up in a turban and a lot of jewels, which leads to a great I can't keep from laughing moment from Wilder, which I guess he was really guilty of in this entire production. Feldman bites the head on the mink that Elizabeth is wearing, and Wilder's "Stop that" is said while he's pulling a Jerry Seinfeld and can barely keep from laughing at what his co-star is doing. They did many takes, and that was the best one. Apparently they really did a lot of takes of this scene where she first gets there, and that's the best they could get with him still laughing a little bit. And I guess he broke a lot during the production, which I think Teri Garr wasn't thrilled about. Although I also read that they loved making this movie so much that Brooks thought of extra scenes to shoot just to keep them filming for longer. Meanwhile, Inspector Kemp gets that angry mob back together to go after the monster again because the creature manages to break loose and kills the stupid jailer who was taunting him with fire. They've given the word mob a bad name. Frederick probably should be pretty worried that the creature will come after him, but he doesn't seem to be. He should probably assume the 7-footer wants blood, or at least his cut of the profits from that one-night-only show you guys worked so hard on. Elizabeth tells Frederick that she won't sleep with him until they're properly married, but dude, what's the big deal anyway? Because he clearly wants to do something that night, but she says no, not yet. You just had passionate sex with Inga maybe an hour ago. Your fiancé is a babe, sure, but how much of the making of the love do you need to do in one night? Although her choice of chastity is why Fred isn't there when the monster finds Elizabeth in her room. He carries her off into the woods, into the woods, into the woods, into the woods. The mob is after them, but I guess he takes her to a spot where no one can find them. And Kahn already has, at this point, the bride of Frankenstein white streaks in her hair. I guess from fright? She tries to make him stop coming on to her, although she's impressed by his large Schwanzstücke. And it's on. She doesn't really want this to happen, but then sings in joy that, "At last I found you." She's a good singer, too. Afterwards, they enjoy a good smoke and apparently are about to go for it a 7th time until he hears the violin again and RUNNOFTs after 7 or 8 quick ones, and you better not brag to your friends. But Liz isn't traumatized by essentially being raped. She even thinks she loves him. Kahn is so good in this scene. Does it age well? No, it doesn't. It was also 50 years ago. Moving on. The monster finds the source of the tunes, which of course is Freddy and friends up on top of the castle. Monster Mash climbs the wall and joins them, although I love the look on Boyle's face when he nearly loses his grip, yet Wilder won't let them help him. He could do it himself! Because of course he barely can. I love how through the imprisonment, the big guy went through all that and apparently satisfying sex with Elizabeth, yet he's still wearing the tux he had on during the Puttin On The Ritz scene. Fred's solution to this violent giant's tendencies to wreak havoc is to share some of his intellect, so the two of them are hooked up to head contraptions. And since the doctor obviously can't work the machine himself, he's going to trust Inga and Igor to do this? Big mistake. Huge. Although it's not even them that screws things up. What really messes up the plan is when the mob arrives at the castle and they use Kemp's fake hand as a battering ram to get inside. They break the machinery before the brain-transferring Husitz is finished. But it did sort of work! The monster is able to speak now and gets up and gives a lovely speech about the love he wants to spread. It brings Inga to tears and the mob is quickly satisfied. Let's let him go! Kemp offers his fake hand in friendship, which the monster accidentally pulls off, but no matter. To the lumberyard! Then it's back to Kemp's for some wine and a snack. The coda has Fred marrying Inga, not Elizabeth. She's the woman he belongs with anyway, although when she hums the tune that's always being played on that violin, he's transformed from Mr. Erudite into a savage beast. The monster's libido is what was transferred into him during the brain exchange thing that didn't quite finish, which means the mannered monster and Elizabeth live more of a boring domesticated life because he's got more of Frederick's humanity now. Although I say their life is boring, but Kahn gets to play another funny bit where she has the famous Bride of Frankenstein upswept hairdo. She didn't quite have that before. She had the streaks, but not the upswept hair. The hiss. And she even does a sachet across the room. I'm not sure if it's being implied that he's unhappy with her while he tries to read the newspaper in bed. Why would he be? The woman's pretty and she's fun. She digs your Schwanz. Schwanzstücke. But, movie over, go home. So the cast. Gene Wilder has come up a few times on this channel before today. I guess it's a nice tie-in with this movie to say that he was in that small role as The Undertaker in Bonnie and Clyde, sitting in the back seat of the car with Gene Hackman, by the way. So his characters were often dealing with death in his early movies. And Bev didn't like it, but we did review his Oscar-nominated supporting work in The Producers, which came out a year after Bonnie and Clyde did. He was really a co-lead with Zero Mostel in The Producers, but a nomination is a nomination. And he was often pretty yelly in that. He's very often yelly in this. Wilder's probably best known, though, for playing the weird Candyman in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in 1971. He's still the best who's had a shot at that role over the years. Depp and Chalamet got nothing on him! Still, for me, and undoubtedly for a lot of other people, it's his work in the Brooks movies I remember the most fondly. This is one of the funniest leading performances in a comedy, and many people have said it's one of the greatest performances, period. Everyone else scores constant laughs in Young Frankenstein, but he does too, and that's not easy. We talked about it just last week that the funniest character in Shaun of the Dead is probably Simon Pegg, and he's the lead character too. Since the lead has to carry the story, it's just harder for him or her to get as many chuckles as the other people in the cast get. That would make sense. Anyway, Mr. Jerome Silberman died 8 years ago when he was 83, but it sounds like things were pretty bad for Gene towards the end of his life. He had Alzheimer's. That's a downer way to end that little bit, but he did have a very long life. Give my creation life. He had 83 years, but Marty Feldman only got about 50, dying at 48, not 50, of a heart attack after some brutal food poisoning. Marty did a lot of stuff on TV, and how about this? Actually has more writing credits than acting credits. Of course, I guess he is typecast looking the way he does. What surprised me is that he never worked with Wilder again. They're such a good team in this, and Gene got into writing his own screenplays for a while in the 70s there. You'd think Gino would write Feldman a role, but he never did. Brooks cast him, though, again in Silent Movie a couple years later. Marty was made to play Igor. Anybody with eyes like that had to get into comedy. The dude just always scores in this movie. He's consistently funny. Just like him, Madeleine Kahn didn't get as many years of life as she deserved. She died of ovarian cancer when she was only 57, shuffling off at the beginning of December 1999, so she just missed the nothing burger that was the Y2K hysteria. Maddie was nominated for 2 supporting actress Oscars in a row, in Paper Moon in 73, then in Blazing Saddles in 74. Her co-star in Paper Moon, Tatum O'Neal, won in 73, then Ingrid Bergman won in 74. I'm not saying that Kahn should have won either of those years, but she was worthy. I'm not a huge Blazing Saddles person, though. I don't really remember her work that well in it. I know that as Lily von Stupp, she was funny. She had to have been funny. She was Madeleine Kahn. Her debut was in What's Up, Doc in 72. Then she did Paper Moon the next year, so her first 2 movies were directed by Peter Bogdanovich. She did other things with Pete and also with Mel and continued working until the end of the 90s, but the only time this hilarious human being has ever come up on this channel before today was her cameo in the Muppet movie. The man with a zipper on his neck, Peter Boyle, is probably best known to modern audiences for playing Ray's dad Frank on Everybody Loves Raymond, but we've talked about his work 3 times before, including in the underrated political drama The Candidate, the Redford movie, which came out 2 years before this. He went on to be in Taxi Driver, and he's got a small role in Spike Lee's Malcolm X. And I can report that Pete didn't have a very long life either. He only made it to 71 and died of multiple myeloma and heart disease. Some critics said he's the best Frankenstein monster since Karloff. He might be right. Cloris Leachman won an Oscar a few years before she played Frau Blucher, Horace Winnie, and that was for another Bogdanovich film, The Last Picture Show. The lady who's tied with Julia Louis-Dreyfus for the most acting Emmys ever won by a woman made it to 94 and only departed us a few years ago. Scrolling through her resume took me a long time. Leachman has 289 credits on the IMDb. She had 5 kids, but I guess she never went home. Leachman had that silly secretary role in the Sandler remake of The Longest Yard, which Chris and I talked about on our sports movie podcast, Scoring at the Movies, a couple years ago. She's also Grandma in Bad Santa. I'll fix you some sandwiches. And I was reminded in looking her up a few days ago that she's uncredited in that. Cloris also has a very brief voiceover role in The Iron Giant, very brief, I think it's 1 line, and is Butch's lady friend in the early scenes in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and we've reviewed all of those movies. Teri Garr came up on this channel when we reviewed both Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Tootsie long ago. She's also Bob Balaban's Ladylove in Ghost World, and she's got a cameo as herself in Altman's The Player. And I don't think she looked as fantastic in any of those as she does in this. Maddie Kahn is beautiful, but Garr is right there with her. She's so cute, actually, and you gotta love that cleavage. Now, we haven't covered Coppola's The Conversation, although we probably should someday, but both Teri Garr and Gene Hackman are in that. Of course, he's a star of it, not just in it. Terry G is nearly 77, by the way, but she hasn't been in anything since 2011. Kenny Mars was the writer of the play and the producers that became Springtime for Hitler. You are the audience. I am the writer. I outrank you. He, like Leachman, was in Butch Cassidy, and he's another person who often worked with both Bogdanovich and Brooks. And we'll wrap up the So the Cast section with the greatest thespian in the whole impressive bunch, Gene Hackman, a man who's been in, I believe, 9 movies I've reviewed at one time or another. 9 times. 9 times. He was in Bonnie and Clyde with Wilder, plus he won Oscars for The French Connection and Unforgiven. Those are all AFI movies, so they're back in our long ago past. Gene was so funny in The Royal Tenenbaums, and we covered that too. Breaks my heart to hear he was a dick to Wes Anderson on that, because he's so funny and so good in that. He was also apparently a dick on Hoosiers, which is one of his best movies. And we covered Hoosiers and The Replacements on Scoring at the Movies, Chris and I did. Plus I reviewed Superman just last summer, and we yapped about him in The Poseidon Adventure a few years ago. His blind man character is just brilliant stuff, and apparently he wasn't even credited when this was released in 74. I guess they didn't want to give away who he was. I think you can easily tell, but then again, he wasn't known for doing comedy or for taking such small roles. He'd won the Oscar for French Connection. He was a big name, big star, but he's great. Their director, of course, was Mel Brooks. In addition to reviewing the producers back in 2018, we covered a favorite of Bev's, I think in 2020. Anyway, we covered Spaceballs. I was surprised to see that he's only directed 11 movies and nothing in nearly 30 years. But when 3 of your first 4 films are the producers, Blazing Saddles, and this, you are a legend, and you don't need to do anything else. Oh, and we've talked about Mel one other time before today, and that's because he had a way-over-the-top cameo as an actor in The Muppet Movie. I have nothing against things like Silent Movie or Robin Hood Men in Tights. Dracula Dead and Loving It wasn't that good, but they do pale in comparison to his big 3. Although that bit in History of the World Part 1 where he, as Moses, has 15, smash, make that 10 commandments, one of my favorite gags in any movie ever. Of course, Mel had an entire comedy career with his best friend, Carl Reiner, years before he even started making his own films. What did they do, the 2,000-year-old man bit? Brooks writes books, he makes up Broadway shows out of his movies, and he has a son I respect a great deal, Max Brooks. And even though Reiner died more than 4 years ago, and of course Mel's wife, Anne Bancroft, has been gone for nearly 20 years, Brooksy keeps soldiering on. He does have about 50 writing credits. He always wrote the scripts he ended up directing, and he, and I guess Wilder too, let the actors ad-lib a lot on this. When you've got people this talented, why not? Feldman even looks right into the camera a bunch of times. The fourth wall, she broken. This was Wilder's first writing credit, though, and he only had about 6 others. And of course, they based this wacky adventure on Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley's Frankenstein book. What was the subtitle? Modern Prometheus or something? And I don't remember ever hearing this before I saw it online yesterday, but Mel did what he did with the producers and turned this into a Broadway musical. That is one of the most successful Broadway hits ever. This was up for some Tony Awards, and I guess it was well liked, but it couldn't have been a phenomenon the way that Lane and Broderick were. Not if I just found out about it yesterday. I don't really follow Broadway, but I'm not out of the loop completely either. John Morris composed the music, and it's good music, as he regularly did for Mel. Cinematographer Gerald Hirschfeld didn't work on Brooks' films regularly before or after this, and they had some problems early on I was reading, but then they got along later, after they got to know each other a little bit. But he did shoot To Be or Not to Be, the remake of that great Lubitsch film from the 40s that Brooks did in 83, I think it was. So he shot that for him. They obviously made up, got along well enough to make another movie together. And John Howard cut the picture, as he did Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and also many other flicks in the Brooks oeuvre. Oh, and I can tell you that my black and white Blu-ray looked pretty great, although Why in the Name of God is a Fox movie that's this famous and was this successful, not on Disney+. I know I've complained about the Fox classics that aren't on their service lots of times, but come on! Get this movie on there, Iger. Not Igor, Bob Iger. I still enjoy Young Frankenstein a lot. For one thing, even though this is a farce and a parody of past Frankie flicks, they do ostensibly the same things the legit Frank movies did. And I remember saying to Bev that the original film really freaked people out back in 1931. They were really horrified. Reanimating a corpse was uncomfortable material for some people. Even the sound of dirt hitting a coffin apparently scared them. Plus the look of Boris Karloff, basically a walking zombie, it isn't scary now, but I can see how it was 93 years ago. But interestingly, here we have a horror movie. Yeah, it's a comedy, but it is a horror movie too, with almost no deaths. Okay, one, the jailer, but even the violence is fairly minimal. There's some choking here and there. 3 times people get choked in this movie? And we see a guy who was just hanged, plus the monster breaks through doors and walls a few times and his thumb's on fire. Still, even though this fits nicely into the Frankenstein canon, it's of course far more interested in being funny than in chilling anyone's blood. So maybe it wasn't the smartest choice for Scary Movie Month, but what the hey, I put it in this slot, why not? And how about that comedy? Did it hold up? Well, I mentioned a while back in this review that I didn't spend all that much time LOLing, but there were a few reasons for that. I watched this when I wasn't feeling at my best, plus I had to pause the show when Bev came home from work, so that hurt the flow. But still, the blind man sequence, Puttin On The Ritz, and so much what Feldman does are genius bits. Everybody's funny in this movie, but Feldman, I guess, is probably the standout above everybody, and of course Wilder himself. The movie was funny then, I think it still is now. Maybe not as funny as I used to think it was. But I do love also how much fun they're clearly having making this movie. So that was how I saw Young Frankenstein. I'll get to how you can contact us and all that in a minute, but first, I'll divvy out those 3 trivia questions I promised you. So, question number 1. Name 3 of the 4 games Bill and Ted play against death in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. So, a bit of a horror question there. They're dead. Question number 2. What is the name of the legitimate business that Vito Corleone runs in The Godfather as a front for his mafia operations? And question number 3. Catwoman has been portrayed by many actresses in big screen movies. I count 5. Name 4 of them. Those answers will spill from my lips in a minute or two, but first I will tell you that on Friday, I'll be back at it on my own and we'll go from funny scares in this movie to very legitimate horror that isn't funny at all in the 1989 Pet Sematary. But as for next Monday, the 21st, Bev will be back from her 1-week hiatus and we'll be talking about a flick that influenced the opening scene in Jaws, and it's also one of Guillermo del Toro's favorite movies, Creature from the Black Lagoon. You can give us some feedback by hitting us with comments on Twix. My @ is @MovieFiend51 and Bev's is @BevEllisEllis. She goes by that on Threads too. Or email us, The address is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. We post our podcasts on YouTube. It's just the same show with our graphic, but it's an option if your app is screwing with your podcasts, which has happened to me a few times, and then I had the option of finding it some other way. The destination in your browser is at HYES Ellis, so just put that right in the browser and hit enter, or click Have You Ever Seen into the search bar on YouTube. As for your podcast app, which is probably where most of you are hearing this, rate us, or write a review, and just spread the word to your friends. And indulge in the Canadian product that is Sparkplug Coffee. They deliver to Americans too, of course, and their website is sparkplug.coffee. Use our HYES promo code and get a one-time 20% discount. All right, time for the answers to those trivia questions. Number 1. Name 3 of the 4 games Bill and Ted play against death in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. They play Battleship, Clue, Table Football, and Twister. Best 3 out of 5. Question number 2. What's the name of the legitimate business that Vito Corleone runs in The Godfather as a front for his mafia operations? It's Genco Olive Oil. Olive oil is still shockingly expensive. A gangster like Vito Corleone would certainly respect that. And question number 3. Catwoman has been portrayed by many actresses in big screen movies. I count 5 women. Name 4. Well, Lee Merriweather was in the 1966 Batman movie. They did a movie, not just the show, back in the 60s. Michelle Pfeiffer was in Batman Returns. Halle Berry was in the putrid Catwoman spinoff. She was beautiful, but that was a terrible movie and she was terrible in it. Anne Hathaway was Selena Kyle in The Dark Knight Rises. She was pretty good. And Zoe Kravitz was in The Batman, the Pattinson one, just a few years ago. Okay then, that's the trivia and that's the podcast. Happy Thanksgiving, my fellow Canadians, and thanks to all of you for checking this thing out. Join me on Friday for Pet Cemetery, and then join Bev and me next Monday when we yap about Creature from the Black Lagoon. Meantime, I'm going to rehearse a big dance number with my scientific creation. It's not just a miracle I managed to reanimate a corpse, but to help him learn to sing and dance, well, that's just bigger than 10 Super Bowls. And cut.